My name is Jason with Global Finishing Solutions, and today we're going to show you how to use the REVO Spot unit. Before we get into actually using the unit, first let me talk about it just a little bit. First off, this is a shortwave infrared curing system. So what shortwave is it's going to be different than any of the other medium wave systems you may be used to. What shortwave does is cures from the inside out. So we send very short wave infrared light, and that's going to heat the substrate beneath what you've applied on that panel and use the heat from that substrate to push everything out from the inside. So what does that mean to your shop? Well, first off, we're going to significantly decrease the cure time it takes to cure a wide range of products. So if you're looking at body filler, that might usually take 15 to 25 minutes to cure with conventional methods. Using a shortwave system, we're going to cure that in about 1 to 2 minutes. If you're looking at your standard 2 to 4 hour dry primer, that we're going to cure in about 6 to 8 minutes, depending on what kind of products you're using. The other thing we're going to do is actually improve the application time of that primer. So what I mean is today we're going to show you 2 different methods. The first is going to be the standard way to cure primer with a lamp. We're going to spray all 3 coats of primer and use the lamp just at the end. Using shortwave, we don't have to cure in between coats. By heating the substrate, we can cure very thick coatings with just one use of the machine. And that takes about 6 to 8 minutes. The second method we're going to show you is the speed prime method. And that's where we're actually going to use this lamp to flash the primer in between coats, and then it's only going to take 3 to 4 minutes after the final coat to cure. This is going to allow you to apply and cure the primer in less than 10 minutes. The next thing this is going to do is actually improve your repair phase cycle time. So you might have got a glimpse of that already just by me talking about how we're improving the application and the cure time. So by fully curing primer in 10 minutes, it allows it to be blocked, sanded, and prepped for paint immediately. There's no need to let it sit overnight or let it sit for a few hours to shrink up to ensure that the body repair is going to be good. By using shortwave, it's going to be 100% cured in that short amount of time. This will expose any defects, so if the area wasn't prepped and feathered out the way it properly should have been, when we cure the primer, it's going to fully shrink up. You may see a little edge mapping if it wasn't prepped properly, but as long as you can sand that out, that primer is never going to shrink for the lifetime of that repair. So everything blocks out smooth, you're fine to paint, and that can be warranted forever. So now that we've touched on the benefits of the REVO Spot unit, let's actually go over the unit itself. So first off, the power requirements. So this is a 220 volt single phase unit. So if you're using some of those bigger Trisc lamps or you have those kind of things in your shop, some of those smaller welders, you probably already have the outlet that you need for this. Now 220 single phase outlets can be a variety of different styles. These are 2 of the most common, either the twist lock style, the round twist lock, and it'll say on there that it's 220 volts, so make sure you check that. And the other will be some of these larger either sharp blade ones, sometimes there's a square one on top. There's about 4 or 5 different ones of these. So make sure you check your outlet. It's always a good idea to have an electrician look at it to make sure you're getting the proper plug on your unit to make sure it's powered properly. Now that you've seen the plugs, let's look at the face of the unit. So on the face we have our 4 shortwave infrared bulbs. Again, that shortwave, way different than the medium wave ones. These bulbs are actually going to pulse once we get to temperature. It's going to be a completely normal thing. It might seem weird at first, but we're going to cover that in using the unit. Next, we have the pyrometer. The pyrometer is the thing that's actually measuring the temperature of the panel that you're curing. Whether it's primer or body filler, anything you're curing is going to be held at a constant, consistent temperature because this will always be monitoring that. Those temperatures are going to be listed on a parameters label that can be found on top of the machine. Any product you would cure is listed on there, from body filler to primer, even base coat and clear coat if you're doing a spot repair. There'll be a flash time and a cure time listed on that label. Most products do not require the flash time. You can just go to the cure. But if you had to apply something very heavy or you're using a very specific product, it's a good idea to set it up for the flash time first and then use the cure time. So the way we're going to set those is on the back of the unit. Let's say, for example, we're going to cure primer. On the left side, we have a knob that's going to control how long the unit's going to run, so our time knob. On the right-hand side, we're going to have our temperature knob. This is very important that we set this properly, and again, that's off the parameters label on the top of the unit. So again, we're going to talk about primer surfacer. It wants us to do 8 minutes at 185 degrees. So we'll simply turn that knob to 8 minutes, and then we'll set our temperature to 185 degrees. Now we'll be set up to cure that product. It's important to note that this is not an egg timer style timer. It's not going to spin as the unit runs. There's an internal timer, so wherever we set this, once we push the start button, that timer is going to sit where it is, and internally this machine is going to count down until the program is complete. To turn the unit on, there's an on-off switch in the center of the panel. When we turn that unit on, our indicator light will show that we have power, and you'll also hear the fans running on the machine. This means that we're ready to run a program. So we'll set our time and temperature. We'll set this up properly on the panel, which I'll go over in the use section. And then you simply hit the start button, and then the unit will run through the program, and it'll turn itself off once this has been completed. The fans will continue to run to keep the unit cool to the touch. Once we're done using the unit for that cycle or for that day, you'll simply hit the on-off switch back to the off position, and the unit's ready to be put away. Let's briefly go over how to set up the REVO Spot unit. You're going to see me set this up later in the video as we actually cure individual products, but the general setup, no matter what you're curing, is going to be the same. So on this panel, you can see a bare metal area. That's going to be our repair area. So if we want to cure a product that we're applying to that specific area, the first thing we want to do is adjust our height. To do that, we're going to loosen our adjustment knob until you see the head start to slide down. Then we know we're loose enough to adjust. We want to adjust the unit up parallel to that, and then we're going to go ahead and tighten that knob. And now we want to move the unit 1 to 2 feet away from our repair area. Shortwave works best from 1 to 2 feet away. If we're too far away, we would start to lose the effectiveness of the shortwave. And if we're too close to the unit, we're actually going to heat up the panel higher than our target temperature, because the bulbs are so close. By the time the heat transfers to the area that the pyrometer is measuring, we could be over temp. So we want to be 1 to 2 feet away, and then I typically lock a wheel to make sure the unit doesn't move. And then we want to adjust our tilt, and we want the tilt of the unit basically to be parallel to our repair area, and make sure that our pyrometer is pointed at the repair area. Now we're going to show you how to cure body filler with the REVO Spot unit. Almost any body filler on the market is going to work fine as long as it's a 2K filler. And by that I mean you have your filler product, and then there's some sort of hardener that gets incorporated into that. So whether it's 3M or EverCoat, any of those products are going to work great. Always refer to the tech sheet to make sure you're mixing the appropriate amount of hardener in with that filler. Usually most fillers are about 2% by weight for hardener to filler. There's some out there that are a little bit different. For today's demo purposes, we're going to use the Optics filler by EverCoat. And the reason we're doing that is because this one is a color changing filler. It changes from a purplish, pinkish color to a green color when it's fully hardened. That way on camera you'll be able to see when it's fully cured with the REVO Spot unit. So the first thing we're going to do is grab a little bit of filler and put it on our mixing board. And we're going to apply the appropriate amount of hardener. And then we're going to mix and apply that to the panel. And again, one thing to keep in mind, like I said before, is make sure you use the right amount of filler and make sure it's fully mixed and incorporated. Otherwise, you may have an issue curing with the REVO unit. There's peroxides in this hardener, and that boils at around 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're going to keep that temperature below that. And if any of this hardener wasn't mixed in and you have a big spot of unmixed hardener, the REVO lamp could actually boil that, causing little pinholes. Again, you can sand them out, reapply filler if you need to, but as long as you're mixing your filler properly, you're never going to have an issue curing with the REVO Spot unit. Let's get this mixed up and we'll get it applied to the panel. We're going to go ahead and apply our filler to the panel. This panel has been sanded with 80 grit. Make sure we don't have any air in there. Smooth out our edges a little. And now we're ready to use the REVO Spot unit. So just as we talked about in setup, we're going to move the unit 1 to 2 feet away from the panel. I'm going to go ahead and lock a wheel to make sure it doesn't spin. Make sure our angle's set appropriately so our pyrometer is pointed at the body filler. And we're going to set that according to our parameters label on top, which is 1 to 3 minutes at 140 degrees. So I'm going to kind of split the difference. We'll go around 2 minutes for 140. Push the start button, and the REVO will do the rest. So now, as you can see, this unit has finished curing the body filler. So at this point, we can cool off the body filler just so it's cool enough to sand. Right now it's still around 140 degrees, and we'll be ready for the next process. So I'll move this lamp out of the way. I'm going to grab a sander and we'll sand it down to show you that the primer is cured. So after you cure filler with the REVO unit, keep in mind it's going to be pretty warm to the touch yet. So you can use compressed air to cool down your body filler. You can also use it on some primers, but I always again refer to the tech sheet or talk to your local paint rep to make sure it's something you can cool down quickly. There's some products on the market that need to naturally cool back down. If they're forced, they can get pinchy, and then you may have to reapply primer. Most primers, since you're going to sand it anyway, it's okay to do so, and especially body filler, there's no problem cooling it down quickly. So we're going to cool this off with some compressed air, and then I'm going to grab the sander and sand it to show you how cured the filler is. Okay, and that should be cool enough to sand. So now we have our sander. I'm going to go ahead and sand this down for you. So you'll notice how quickly that the edges of the filler sand and feather out, so I can get my high spots down right away. Everything feathers out nicely. So at this point I would block things out nice and smooth, do my finish sanding, and then we're ready for primer. The next thing we're going to show you is how to cure primer with the REVO Spot unit. There's a couple different ways to do this. First would be the conventional way. In the conventional way, you're going to spray each coat of primer, let it flash for a minute or two in between, and after the last coat of primer, you would set up and run the unit according to the parameters chart that we discussed earlier. Typically, it's about 6 to 8 minutes at 185 degrees Fahrenheit. The next method we're going to show you is the speed method, and that's what we're going to be showing you next. In the speed method, what you're going to do is actually use the REVO Spot unit to help flash that primer in between coats. This is also going to force out some of the solvents from the inside. So after our third and final coat, when we use the unit, it only has to be set up for a couple of minutes to fully cure the primer. We should be able to do this start to finish in well under 10 minutes. A few things to consider when mixing your primer is you want to make sure you check your tech sheet first. There's a few primers that require a 5-minute flash after the final coat, before you put heat to that product. So always check your tech sheet. Almost every other primer out there you're going to be able to hit with heat immediately. Make sure you're using medium or slow hardeners and reducers. We don't want to speed up anything chemically when we're using the spot unit. Since we're going to push everything from the inside out, we want that top surface to stay chemically open as long as possible so everything can come out smooth and cleanly. You're not going to speed up the curing process by using a fast reducer or a fast hardener, and we definitely do not want to use any accelerator. So just your standard primer, medium or slow hardener, and medium or slow reducer. So I have some primer mixed up. I'm going to go ahead and put my respirator on. I've pre-set up the spot unit to our correct height. Again, we want to make sure the pyrometer on the front of the unit is pointed at our repair area. And what I'm going to do next then is I'll spray my first coat of primer. I'm going to go to the outside edges of my repair area. I'm going to flash that primer with the spot unit. I'll immediately spray my next coat as soon as it is flashed. The second coat will flash even faster because now our panel has been preheated. After the second flash, I'm going to apply the third coat. I'm going to set the unit to about 3 or 4 minutes at that 185, and I'm going to let it do its final cure, and when it's done, we'll be able to sand it right away. So I'm going to get my mask on, so I won't be able to talk very well, but let's shoot some primer and show you the spot speed prime method. Something else to take note of is on this repair, we made sure we feathered the repair area improperly, so that way you'll be able to see the primer shrink into that area. And what we're going to show you is after we've fully primed this panel, as long as we can sand that out, the repair is going to stay that way for the lifetime of the repair. So you don't have to worry about primer shrinkage or comeback issues down the road. So our first coat is done flashing, so I'm going to move the unit, I'm going to spray my next coat, and we'll continue this process. Our second coat is now flashed, so I'm going to move the unit, spray our third and final coat, and then I'll set our final cure time and temperature. So now that we've done our third and final coat, we're going to set this up, and essentially what you can do is cut your primer cure time in half from what it is on the parameter sheet. So here it says 8 minutes at 185 for this specific primer. We're going to cut that down to 4 minutes. Still at our 185 degrees. Push the start button, and now we'll let the unit do its thing. As soon as it's stopped the curing process and the lights have turned off and our indicator light goes red, we'll be ready to cool the primer down. We'll use compressed air for that, and we'll be ready to sand and get this thing ready for paint. So now the unit has run its course. The primer is fully cured. It's still pretty hot, so what we want to do now is we're going to cool this down with some compressed air so we can sand it without it being hot. I'm going to put a little guide coat on it. We'll sand it down. You'll be able to see where our primer has shrunk in around our area that was improperly feathered. But again, we have enough primer on there. We'll be able to block that out, and this thing will be ready for paint. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the sander now, and we'll cool this down with some compressed air. So next I'm going to apply some dry guide coat, just so on camera you can help see where that primer has actually shrunk in. So I'm going to take some 320 grit sandpaper. I'm going to quickly go over this to show you that shrinkage area, and then we'll do our final sand after that. So here you can see where that primer has shrunk in from our improperly feathered area. You should leave a pretty good gap in between layers. Here there was maybe a 1/16 of an inch between the layers of sealer, paint, and clear coat. Again, not following proper procedure, but I want to show you how now, as long as we can sand this out with a hard pad and not burn through the primer, this repair will be good for a lifetime. Okay, so our repair area has fully been sanded down. We're nice and smooth to the touch now. That ringed out area, that shrunken in area is fully sanded smooth. I'm going to switch to my other pad, finish my edges, and this will be ready to go to the paint department. So our repair is fully completed. This is ready to go over to the paint department for final sanding and prep for the booth. So we just showed you the speed prime method using the REVO Spot unit. You're able to do a repair very quickly and completely in under 10 minutes without rushing through any steps, taking your time and making sure everything is sanded properly. Now we're going to show you the conventional method, so maybe something that doesn't have to be done quite as quick or you're not working in a speed lane repair. So we can spray our primer in the traditional method. So by that I mean we're going to spray our first coat, we're going to let that flash naturally, spray our second coat, let that flash, and then our third and final coat. After the third and final coat, we will then use the REVO unit to cure. Again, this is shortwave infrared, so we're heating from the inside out. So it's not necessary to use the unit in between coats unless you're trying to get things done even quicker than you can with this method. Same rules apply as far as using primer. You want to use any standard 2K primer will work great. Stick to your medium and slow hardeners and reducers. You can push your flash times in between coats. Those flash times are in those tech sheets because typically when you're spraying primer, we want some of those solvents to come out before we spray the next coat on top and kind of trap those inside. Since we're using shortwave, no matter how much is in there, we're going to push it out, especially if we're using a medium or slow hardener and reducer. So we can cheat those times. Sometimes it'll say 5 to 7 minutes in between coats. Realistically, you can go to 1 or 2 minutes in between coats. The only time you may want to give it a little bit more flash is if you're going to spray a coat really heavy. Maybe there's something you didn't see and now you need a little bit more primer and you're at risk of running your primer and you don't want to sand out a run. Even if you run the primer at the same settings that are on the parameters label on the machine, it's going to fully cure all the way through that run. Our final time and temperature is going to be 8 minutes at 185 to cure this primer. I'm going to go ahead, get my respirator on. We're going to shoot all 3 coats. I'm going to give it 1 to 2 minutes in between. And again, we'll hit it with a REVO at the end. Once that's done, I'll cool it off and we'll sand it so you can see the primer dries all the way through in the conventional method as well. So our first coat is flashed for about a minute. I'm going to go ahead and spray my next coat, and then we'll let that one flash for a minute or so as well before we spray our third and final. So our second coat is flashed again for about a minute. You can give it more time. You don't have to rush it if you don't need to. But again, with the REVO, we're curing from the inside out. So we can push those flash times as long as we're using a medium or slow hardener and reducer. So I'm going to apply my third coat. I'm going to set up the REVO for 8 minutes at 185 degrees. We'll let it run through its course, and then we'll sand it immediately after. So as with any product, we set the unit, again, 1 to 2 feet away. We have our time and temperature control knobs. As I said a moment ago, we'll set it at 8 minutes for about 185 degrees. We'll go ahead and push the start button. There's no need to sit and monitor the unit. If the unit gets bumped too close or too far away, having that pyrometer, it's automatically going to adjust temperature. So there's no need to worry about over or under curing this product. So we'll set the unit up and wait until we get our red indicator light, and we'll be ready to sand. So as you can see, our unit stopped curing, the lights are off, and our indicator light has turned red. So this process is done. Again, this is the conventional method. Our primer is still going to be a little bit warm yet. So before we sand it, I like to hit it with a little compressed air if I'm in a hurry to get on it, to make sure it's cool enough to sand. So I'm going to go ahead, I'll cool that off now. Like before, we'll put some guide coat on it. I'll grab the sander, we'll sand it down to show you it's cured. Like our other one as well, we made sure we improperly feathered the repair. So when I put on the guide coat, I'll hit it with a hard pad first so you can see that shrunk in area. I also tried to spray it a little bit heavier to show if maybe you have a little sag, how it's cured all the way through. You can fully sand it down. If you're at a point where you miss something and you need to over apply to fill that with primer, you can go ahead and do that. This will 100% cure and shrink the primer, so you can sand that out. Everything will still powder up nice, and we'll be ready to send it to paint. So once again, like before, here's the dry guide coat. I'm gonna go ahead and get some of that on there, so you can see our repair area as we sand it. And just as before, as I mentioned, we're going to start with the hard pad. I'll just sand around the repair area first, so you can go ahead and see that edge mapping that commonly happens with primer. Again, the nice thing here is it's fully shrinking now, where typically if you just sand the outside and there's still solvents trapped in there, a month or two down the road, that primer is going to continue to shrink. If you can see that through the paint, you may have to repaint the vehicle. So it's okay to see that edge mapping as long as we can sand it out. So here we can see that ringing of the individual layers, again from improper sanding. And here you'll see a little bit of that sag I tried to put in there to show you if maybe you had a pinhole or there was a little funny area where maybe you didn't have the body filler perfect. You could try to fill that with primer. It's going to be cured all the way through after using the REVO. So I'm going to go ahead now and sand this down further. So I've switched over to our soft pad. I'm going to sand the other edges of my primer. This is actually a really great example of what happens if something's improperly sanded. This panel's been painted quite a few times, so our mill thickness is pretty heavy. So by the time I've sanded all the way down and got my ringing to go away, you can see I'm already coming back into my feather-edged area. So the beauty of using REVO is it's only been 10 to 15 minutes, so the primer in my gun is still good. So if you had something really rough like this you need to work in, and you start to break through the primer and realize you have to reprime, there's no need to mix additional primer. We can grab our primer gun and go right back on the same thing. Our primer's still ready to go. So I'll show you in this example now. I can go ahead and tack off my area. I should probably blow it off and wipe it down, but I'm going to show you how, if you have to fill a big nasty area like we have one here, and there was a nice sharp dent there that probably should have had filler in it. So we got our first initial fill done with that primer. We can go ahead now, reapply our primer that's still wet in the gun, hit it with the REVO, and it should be all finished up. So now that we've reapplied a nice thick coat of primer, once again we can set our unit up just like before, 1 to 2 feet away. Our time and temperature are still good, so we'll hit the start button, let it do its thing. Again, just like before, once cool, we can sand this and ship it over to paint. So you can see our primer flashes off very quickly, dries very quickly. So what we're going to do now is we'll cool this off, we're going to sand it, and we'll show you how quick you can do that re-repair. So as you can see, now we were able to fully sand out that repair after repriming. And that's just a great example of what REVO can do. If you have some bodywork that comes over that's a little iffy, or in shops just mistakes happen. Maybe something got missed. We didn't realize until we started sanding the primer that we're probably going to burn through and don't have enough on. With REVO, it's going to cure fast enough that we can reapply without having to mix more primer. Just use what's left in the gun. Go ahead and hit it with a REVO lamp one more time. After a few minutes, we're able to get right back on the repair, finish sanding, give it over to paint, and all we've lost is maybe 5 to 10 minutes instead of a whole day if we had to mix more primer and let it air dry naturally. So REVO's going to save you in some of those rework situations. This thing's ready to go over to paint, and we're going to show you something else next. So the next thing we're going to show you is how to do a simple bumper repair with the REVO Spot unit. A big mistake that typically happens is if we have some damage like this, we do have some spider cracks in our paint. We know that there was significant pressure put on this bumper. If this dent has been sitting in there for a long time, there's going to be some stressed areas in the plastic, especially where these curves are really sharp from the dent. So what we can use the REVO for is we're going to set the temperature to about 225 degrees on the REVO lamp. We're going to get in here back to our regular 1 to 2 feet away. We're going to turn the lamp on and let it heat up. As soon as the light starts to flash, we know that we've reached our target temperature, and that heat is just going to relax all that plastic. It's going to make the dent very easy to push out. A lot of times, since plastic has memory anyway, the dent will come out on its own. But the other thing it does is typically you're pushing this dent out by heating with a heat gun. The footprint of that heat is very small. So what happens is we'll work this little dented area and we won't relieve the stress that's still in the plastic around it. So if this area is low, we prime it, we sand everything down nice and smooth. Now that bumper goes in the booth and goes through a regular bake cycle, those stressed areas are going to relax under that long, high temperature bake. And now our spot is going to be higher than it's supposed to be and where we fixed it with filler. So a good idea with the REVO Spot unit is, again, we're going to put this on, set our temp at 225, let it go until it flashes for a little while, maybe 5 minutes or so, and that's going to relax all the stress around that area. Once it starts to flash, you'll see me come in, I'll push this dent out if it doesn't come out on its own and make sure that all that stress is relieved. So I'm going to bring in our REVO Spot unit. Just like I said before, anywhere from 1 to 2 feet away is fine. Make sure my pyrometer on the front of the unit is pointed at the panel. Set my temperature to 225. We'll set it for about 5 minutes, and we're going to hit the start button. So now the unit is going to heat up that plastic. Once it starts to flash, we know we've reached our target temperature, and then we can start to push out that dent. So as you can see, we're starting to slowly flicker. That means we should be up to a nice high temperature, which we are. So I'm going to go ahead. We'll get on the back side of this panel. We're just going to leave the heat on it. I'm going to grab a tool because the plastic is obviously very hot, around 225 degrees. And I'm going to slowly push on this dent and see if I can get it to pop out of there. There we go. You can see how easy I can manipulate the plastic. So I'm going to push on some of those stressed areas. And then just sort of massage the plastic all around that area where it's nice and warm. I don't know if you can see the plastic moving on camera, but kind of just massage those areas, make sure all the stress is out of them. And then we'll just let the spot unit run for the additional minute or two that's left on the timer. Once it's done, we know that this plastic is all nice and relaxed and ready for our repair. From every point hereafter, you can use the REVO on the primer, any plastic repair material you might need, and we'll be good to go for paint. So another simple use for the REVO Spot unit is to fix any paint defects in fresh paint, especially if it's a vehicle that has to leave right away, or maybe even the customer's coming to pick it up, or you just want to see if it's something you can save or you're going to have to repaint. So we have some panels here that just came out of the booth with a regular bake cycle. We have some dirt and some stuff in the paint. So what we want to do is we're going to use the REVO at a lower temperature, so around 160 to 180 degrees is fine. We're just going to hit this spot for a few minutes just to get it out of, right now it's kind of in fingerprint. So we're going to hit this with a little bit of heat. We're just going to finish the cure that's on that clear coat so we can go ahead and get it sanded and either get it polished, or if we know we have to repaint, we can get it back in the booth and get it fixed. So I'm going to set the REVO up just like every other time, about a foot or so away. I'm going to set the temperature to around 175 degrees, and we should really only need to hit it for about 3 to 4 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and start that process. As soon as the lamp has finished its cure, I'm going to grab some 1000 grit or 1200 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to test sand those little spots to make sure the clear powder's up nice, to make sure we're ready to polish. So as you can see, the unit has just stopped with that cycle. So we completed that. The clear didn't really shrink up or anything, so it looks like it's good and ready to sand. Now it should be nice and not a fingerprint. So we're going to go ahead, take some 1000 grit paper just on a little hard block, and I'm going to sand on some of these nibs lightly to make sure that the clear is good and set up. And we're going to make sure that it powders nice so we can go ahead and see if we can get these out and get it over to polish. All right, so we have our little dirt spots right here. So again, 1000 grit paper. I'm just going to lightly hit it first to see what we're getting. And this is what I'm looking for. I want my clear to powder up really nice. Everything should wipe off smooth. Nothing should be getting stuck in the paper. So now I can sand just a little bit further. identify my imperfections. Now hopefully you can see these on camera, but here's my little imperfections. We had some dirt here. You can even see where the clear was a little bit heavy coming off of that dirt nib. I'm showing it was probably in the first coat. And then another little imperfection here. Since our clear is powdering up nice, I'm going to go ahead and finish blocking those out. As we can see, our clear blocked out really nice. Everything's smooth, still powdery. Since everything's nice and flat now, we know that this is ready to send over to detail where they can do their finish polishing, get this car back to reassembly, and it's ready to go. So to recap, the REVO Spot unit is going to work on any product in your shop. This unit is designed to reduce the inefficiencies that you're going to experience there. It's going to cut down on rework. By having that full cure-through process, it's really going to make your shop flow smoother, and repairs are going to be easier and more complete. It's also going to cut down on comebacks. Since everything is 100% cured, you're going to know what that product is going to look like 6 months down the road before it ever leaves your body shop. This is compatible with nearly all products that shops are going to be using. As long as they're a 2K product, and we want to make sure that we're not using those fast or low temperature hardeners and reducers. Make sure you're using medium and slow. Setup is always going to be the same no matter what you're curing, 1 to 2 feet away. Make sure you follow the parameters that are on the decal on top of the machine, and the rest should take care of itself. If you have more questions beyond that, the first thing I would always recommend doing is going on to revocuring.com or the Global Finishing website. On there we have a user manual that'll walk you through every individual product that you would ever use this on your body shop in an easy to follow step-by-step sort of basis. Beyond that, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Global Finishing Solutions directly, and we'll make sure we answer those questions for you.